Bienvenue à la réunion numéro
Welcome to meeting number 73 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veteran Affairs.
2 and the motion adopted on Monday, October 3rd, 2022. The committee is resuming its study on the experience of women veterans. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule.
Today's meeting is being held in hybrid format. We have witnesses here with us via video conference. As you know, when it comes to interpretation, for those who are on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between English, French, or the floor. And here in the room, we have headsets, earpieces. It's true that the room has sophisticated audio equipment. However, please be careful. Don't bring your earpieces too close to the microphone when you speak, because this could cause feedback for our interpreters. Let me also remind you that connection tests have been done according to the rules. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to give you a warning. We will be discussing experiences linked to mental health. This could trigger bad experiences for staff, MPs, and others who have gone through similar experiences. If you are distressed or need help, please do not hesitate to contact the clerk.
I would like to provide this trigger warning. We may be discussing experiences related to general health and mental health. This may be triggering to viewers, members, or staff with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. Et il me fait plaisir d'accueillir cet après-midi pour
This afternoon for this session, I'm glad to welcome MP Hoback,
Wagenthal. Welcome.
replacing MP Wagenthal.
Zoom, who replaced Mr. Miao. Eh bien, chers collègues, we have as an individual Nina Charlene Osherwood by video conference, welcome, and Vivian Stewart, RCMP Veterans Women Council, by video conference also. So we will start with you, Mrs. Charlene Osherwood, for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good day. I am Nina Usherwood, a 42-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. I served from 1979 until 2022 when I was medically released. Veterans Affairs Canada does not recognize that my service experience is different than the service experience of male members because as a woman, I faced discrimination throughout my career. Veterans Affairs does not accept the physical impacts of discrimination I experienced during my military career. Assessments from both the Canadian Forces Health Service psychologist and an occupational stress clinic psychologist hired by Veterans Affairs documented the physical toll of the decades of the career-long discrimination as well as the mental injury I suffered. Veterans Affairs continues to deny my claim that my type 2 diabetes is attributable to my military service. Veterans Affairs does not acknowledge the impact that the military's discrimination and highly sexualized culture has on the physical health of female veterans. Research has established that discrimination, both overt and covert, can have a mental as well as a physical toll on health. Harris and al. In their 12-year study of 12,000 Australian women found that perceived stress is a strong risk factor for diabetes, regardless of the presence of other risk factors like hypertension, physical activity, smoking, diet, or weight. Pover and al. In their meta-analysis on stress and diabetes showed that emotional stress increases the development of diabetes. Shamir and al. In their article, Stress-Induced Diabetes, a review, showed the biological mechanism for which chronic stress impacts diabetes. Veterans Affairs Canada does not accept that discrimination experienced by veterans can have a physical cost as well as a mental cost. The discrimination that gender and sexual minorities continue to experience in the Canadian Armed Forces has an impact on the physical health of current and future veterans. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Charlene Osher-Rood. And now we're going to go to Mrs. Vivienne Stewart from the RCMP Veterans Council. Please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président. I would like to
Thank you, Chair.
for inviting me to contribute to the important work that you are doing in this study on the experiences of women veterans in the RCMP and CAF. On June 6, 1977, I joined the RCMP at the age of 24 with a bachelor's degree from the University of Victoria. I joined 31 other women, the majority of whom also came with post-secondary degrees. This was not the case with most of the male recruits at that time. I think that the bar was set higher for us, but our expectations were also higher. For me, the history and reputation of the RCMP promised adventure, the opportunity to engage in a wide variety of interesting work, a way to make a difference, as well as opportunities to advance in the organization and have ultimately a rewarding long-term career. My goal was to become a foreign liaison officer or to join the then security service. I served in Quebec following training in Regina and then transferred to Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, where I was living when I resigned in December 1984. During my time in the RCMP, I had a variety of assignments ranging from the enforcement of federal statutes to rural provincial policing duties. I think I was a good cop and I do not regret the time I spent in the force. It was certainly a learning experience. I decided to leave when it became apparent that those in staffing at headquarters in Halifax were making decisions affecting my career with which I disagreed and that I later discovered were likely related to their suspicion that I was gay. After I put in my papers, one of my colleagues, also a constable and a friend of mine, came to see me at home to ask if I really wanted to leave the force and indicated that there were rumors circulating that I was gay. Perhaps if I had known about this before I put in my resignation, I might have stayed and pushed the issue. I don't know. Probably not. At that point, I was ready for something new, as I think I had already accepted that my career would never be the career I had hoped for. In any case, at the time, given the evident homophobia existing throughout the force and indeed in society itself, I would not even admit or come out to someone I considered a friend. Again, it reinforced for me that I had made the right decision to leave. I do not recall being angry or frustrated at the time, just disappointed. I believed that I had something of value to offer the RCMP and would go a lot farther, even to the officer level. I had to give up on that dream and move on. In any case, there was no exit interview for me. My sergeant at the time just asked me if there was anything he had done that had caused me to resign. My answer was simply no. I didn't really have much to add to that, at least nothing that I thought he would have understood. As the only female member in most of the postings I had, I found my male counterparts, for the most part, to be hardworking, collegial, helpful, and supportive. I eventually returned to BC to attend law school at UBC. I was called to the bar in 1991 and practiced until I retired at the end of August 2022. I was one of those members who were unaware that after leaving the force with less than 10 years service, I became a veteran. When I was asked by Jane Hall, who spoke with you on Tuesday, to volunteer with the new council that was being formed within the RCMP Veterans Association in 2013, I had to clarify with her that I was in fact a veteran in order to be able to serve on the council. My dad was a veteran, having served in the Navy in the Second World War. To me, that was a veteran. My main focus with the RCMP Women Veterans Council has been on how often questionable legal interpretations have adversely affected women veterans, particularly those involved in the Merlo-Davidson class action. I have not had occasion personally to contact VAC or use its services. My current understanding of VAC and its dealings with RCMP female veterans therefore comes from the work our council has done over the last 10 years or so. It is apparent from our council investigations that neither the legislation nor the VAC decision-making processes are clear enough so that our veterans can navigate the system on their own without assistance and without running into procedural roadblocks and hostile gatekeepers. Anecdotally, our evidence shows that female veterans continue to mistrust and fear VAC and the power it wields apparently arbitrarily over their basic interests. The minister's written responses to questions posed on the clawback issue that were supplied in March 20th of this year are for the most part unsatisfactory. At the March 20th meeting of this committee, the minister's representative stated that communications would be going out to the individuals to ensure that that practice is stopped. Whether this response was in reference to level 1 and 2 claimants only or to claimants of all levels is not particularly clear, which again highlights the transparency and communication issues at VAC. Without transparency, there can be no accountability. Without accountability, there will be no trust. We are looking to this committee to recommend immediate amendments to the Pension Act to exclude settlement damages for the types of claims raised in the class action from the clawback provisions. This committee should also do whatever it can to ensure that VAC streamlines and simplifies its processes, that VAC improves its transparency, its communication, and its training for frontline staff so that they better understand women veterans' experiences and respond within the spirit and intent of the legislation rather than as Canada's meanest insurance company. I also have a number of recommendations that are set out in the written brief that I provided to the clerk earlier today, and I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Stewart and Mrs. Osherwood, and for your opening remarks. And I'd like to offer to you that if you need to stop for a break of 5 minutes, so just let me know because we're going to go till 5:30. So now we're going to start a 6-minute round of questions. And I'm pleased to start with MP Fraser-Tolmie for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony. Thank you for your service, and welcome back, Sergeant Usherwood. I know that we've interviewed you before, and so we appreciate you making another appearance. I would like to start off, sometimes when we do some of the questioning, we get a little bit of a background. And Ms. Stewart, could you please tell me the years that you were an RCMP officer? I missed that. If you did share that in your testimony.
Yes, so I joined in June 1977 and I left in December 1984.
Okay, and I apologize that these are kind of just straightforward questions. I'm going to open up a little bit later on. But you said that once you had left, that you were not made aware that you were, allowed to access veterans' benefits. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I left before the 10-year cutoff when basically your superannuation kicks in and it's no longer obtainable. Basically, you're in and that's part of your pension. So I had all of mine returned to me, and as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it. My only awareness of VAC at that time, I think, was that it was paying for my father's yard work at home.
Right. Okay. Sometimes afterwards, it's a little bit disappointing to find out that you were entitled to some benefits or that you could have made some career decisions and, or, as you say, could have stayed in a little bit longer. One of the things I understand is that, being one of the first female RCMP officers, that you did train at one point to be in the iconic musical Ride. And but you at some point decided not to partake in that. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that and what was behind your decision?
Yes, and thanks for the question. So maybe I'll just give you a little bit of background on how that all came about. There were no women in the musical ride, or even thoughts, I think, of having women in the musical ride until 1980. In 1980, somebody higher up decided that, we've got women in the force. We better show their faces in other aspects of the force as well. And certainly, as you say, the musical ride is iconic for the RCMP and also for Canada. So what happened in 1980, or early in 1980, was that somebody in the RCMP phoned every single female member across Canada and asked us if we were interested in trying out for the musical ride. So being a horse crazy kid from a way back, I jumped at the chance for that. And so I was, there were two, so how it works is there's an equitation course, 2 sessions of an equitation course. And in those days, I'm not sure how it works now. So there was 2 months and 2 months. The first 2 months, there were 16 members. In that group, 2 were women and 14 were men. In the second group, the second 2-month group, which I was in, there were 4 women and 12 men. And so generally what happens is the musical ride is formed of a troupe of 32 riders. It used to replace half every year. So it would be a 2-year posting. So I went off to Ottawa in, I believe it was April of 1980, to Rockcliffe, to the stables. And it was quite the experience. We were there for 2 months. And as I say, there were four women, 12 men. This was, I think, probably the first experience I had in my time in the force. And at that point, I was almost 3 years in, where I felt what I suppose would be the inkling of what we now call a toxic work environment. There were hazing rituals, misogynistic jokes, the kind of thing that I think most of us probably ran into at the time and didn't think much of. There was, I think for me, aside from, the hazing ritual, which did not affect me personally, as I was not the subject of that, the misogynistic jokes kind of indicated what life would be like as a musical ride member out on tour. And that was not appealing to me. And also one of the instructors that we had, also who was would be accompanying us out on tour, was also someone who gave me a very uncomfortable and very creepy feeling. So, and nothing, it was in those days, so 1980, well, we're looking at almost 44 years ago, there was nothing said about any of the inappropriateness of the conduct, but I'm sure if I felt it, that my 3 female colleagues also felt it. So on course was one thing for that kind of behavior, but the idea that once you're out on tour and there's just you and the people that you're working with out there, it just felt to me like it would be worse. And so when they asked me, when they actually at the end of the course, they will go through the 16 trainees and ask us if we were. If we actually passed, ask us if we were interested in joining the ride. I said no, and I went back to Nova Scotia.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate that. I think my time's up.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Tolmie. And now let's turn to Mr. Randeep Sarai for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of the witnesses. I don't know which way to look. I'll probably look at that screen. It'll be easier for me. Ms. Stewart, thank you for your service and obviously for being here today. Veterans Affairs. I think in 2019, Veterans Affairs Canada held its first Women's Veteran Forum to discuss specific challenges women face after service. I think your colleague came to this committee and told us that you participated in the Women's Veterans Forum. In your opinion, what are the challenges facing women veterans with regards to their physical health, their mental health, and safety concerns, and have these forums been helpful with that context?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Sarai. I was not actually at the 2019 conference. I went to the conference that was organized this year in February in Ottawa that focused on women and LGBTQ 2S plus issues, which was very interesting. But I guess for me, looking at the issues of, let me just look at this here. Sorry. So we're looking at, I think what we would like to see front and center is better training for the people at VAC who deal with women veterans, so that they develop a better understanding of women's issues in the overall context of different kinds of things that women face when during their careers, depending on the work that they do. And certainly I'm speaking here primarily for the RCMP, so I'm not aware of everything that goes on at CAF, certainly. So I think developing specialized or subject matter experts on diverse communities within the organization, that would be helpful. Also, I think what is key and what I understand is fairly lacking right now is trauma awareness. So, and I understand there is training and education for that. That is very, very important, because I think it's probably easier dealing with the physical issues that women veterans have rather than the psychological ones. I mean, certainly when the representatives from the RCMP spoke with you back in October, I personally was kind of surprised at the emphasis that they were putting on changes to kit and equipment. You know, that's fine. That's probably the easy stuff. The hard stuff is actually dealing with, you know, the effects of toxic workplaces and toxic leadership on the actual people who are in those situations.
Thank you. I also want to ask you, how we can improve programs and services for all of veterans, but especially for women veterans. In your experience, and aside from the first part, which you had said that being told that you are a veteran, so you're entitled to those services, would be a good start, but I'm hoping that is now told. What are the main issues that women veterans are facing when transitioning to civilian life, and specifically RCMP women veterans?
I think, not to belabor the point too much, it really is a question of lack of information and lack of education on VAC program, VAC services. It's quite amazing to see that things haven't progressed the way we would probably have hoped that they would have in even the last 10 years, where people don't know. I mean, I think they probably get now that, yes, they are veterans, but I'm pretty sure there's still a lot of ignorance out there as to what is available to you as a female veteran and benefits from through VAC. And I kind of have to point the finger at the RCMP here at a lack of information and really not taking the responsibility to inform members of what they can expect, what their rights are, what is available to them throughout their careers, so that they are prepared for a healthy and successful transition into civilian life.
Thank you. And I quickly want to ask Sergeant Usherwood, you worked, you said that you stayed hidden because of the extreme hostility you witnessed towards transgendered service members. You felt safe only in 2009 to be yourself. I'm sorry, first of all, that it took so long for you to feel safe. But what changes in the armed forces made you feel safe at that time?
To be honest, partly it was my own career position. I was working with a very small number of people. I was not on a large crew, and I was working directly for one supervisor, and I trusted that person more than anything else. I was aware of the changes that would be happening, but I was also in contact with other trans people in the forces. And I know even after I came out, that I started living as myself and being accepted, I am well aware that other people were still continued to be driven out of the forces by their toxic culture. I was in a place where I'd been for 7 years, and as a consequence, I knew the environment and I felt safe with the people I worked with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your interventions. And maintenant, nous allons donc.
Now we'll give the floor to Mr. Luc Desilets. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, colleagues. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. Thank you for your service as well. Ms. Usherwood, it's a pleasure to see you again here at the committee. I find your courage extraordinary, and your testimony will help us further document some injustices. Could you tell me, when you came out as a transgender person, what was the immediate reaction of your work colleagues?
I'm sorry, I'm not receiving English translation of that question.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we're going to make sure that everything is working. So, je sais pas, là, je...
Ms. Usherwood, can you hear the interpretation now? We are doing a test to make sure that you are hearing the interpretation. Maybe, well, we'll take a break. The analyst? Well, will the technician reach out to her? Go ahead.
Of the Zoom interface and select English.
It does say English right now.
Oh, Kathy has something.
Okay.
Okay, Mrs. Wagenthal?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm not getting interpretation either.
Either.
French to English. Thank you. And I'm sad, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to suspend a few minutes and we're going to come back. Meeting suspended.
Can I see a picture of your board?
Okay.
la séance.
We are resuming our session. I think the tests have been done. Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Desilets, could you please start from the very beginning, please? Thank you. With pleasure, Mr. Chair. Good evening to my colleagues. Thanks to our guest for being present. Thank you for coming to share your experiences with us, experiences that are not always easy to share. My question goes to you, Miss Usherwood. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It's a pleasure to see you once again here in the committee. I remember your remarks the last time, and once again, I find you very brave to appear here before us this way. We all hope that both of your remarks will improve our knowledge and further highlight some injustices and some problems. And our recommendations will try to remedy the situation. Ms. Usherwood, I was trying to get some more information. When you came out, how did your colleagues perceive the fact that you were transgender?
I think the same as parents and family. They didn't understand it, but they were willing to accept what I told them. I think that's the biggest thing. I know my immediate supervisor was very puzzled about some of the decisions I would make in it as time went by and not really understand it. But as I said, acceptance is at least a starting point. It's nobody's walked in my shoes. I mean, even many trans people have not experienced what I've experienced, the life I've experienced. So it's to actually understand someone, you have to be them.
J'imagine.
I imagine so. With all the experience you have, could you tell us the units where there's greater discrimination and those with less discrimination?
Well, at the time, I was in the primary reserves. I was in Comox at the time, and the specific the other places was they were Army units and associated with Kingston, Edmonton, and Gagetown.
Est-ce que vous avez senti dans ces...
In these different units, do you feel that sometimes people were more open-minded?
I generally experienced open-mindedness. There was a reluctance on some of the people I felt that did not agree with what's happening to actually voice it at the time. But I know that was not the case, as I said, in other units and the experience of other trans people. Definitely in other places. Sometimes I actually felt listening to what happened is the military's policy on accommodation. It's called, at the time it was called Guidance for Transgender or Transsexual Individuals, and it was dated. It was the 11th. It's CF Mill 11-9, I think it was. So it was out in 2011, and it was for the guidance for commanders and responsibilities with accommodation for transgender individuals in the forces. And at the time, I felt listening to it, in some cases, the units were actually using the policy to discriminate against the individuals. The policy would be later replaced in 2017, and I was actually involved in some of the policy change that went forward. It didn't go as far as I felt it should to be in the forces, but like any bureaucracy, you compromise.
Avez-vous l'impression que
Did you have the impression that the reactions from your colleagues and the reactions of the population in general towards trans persons was associated to the fact that people did not understand, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the situation?
Well, I think this is what any minority experiences. It's when you don't understand somebody, it's easier to not, like, when you don't know somebody, it's easier to not understand them. And the more you know, the more you understand. They're just people the same as you. My phrase that I like to use: it's easier to hate what you don't know.
Merci beaucoup, madame.
Thank you very much.
Si, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
Miss Rachel Blaney for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And as always, everything goes through the Chair. My first question is for Ms. Usherwood. It's very good to see you, my friend. I want to come back to a bit of your testimony. You talked about part of the reason you came out was because you felt a lot of trust for your leadership and that it was safe and that particular person gave you a sense of comfort in taking the next step. And so I know that that's not, and you said that as well in your testimony, is not often the reality for so many other people who serve. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what is needed within the military at that level to sort of create systems that will provide more inclusive practices for leadership so that we can see that safe environment increase.
Well, the military actually is trying to change its culture as identified by Madame Deschamps in her report and subsequent reports. It's trying to change it. But like anything in the government, there's a shortage of resources and there's a shortage of time and money. And that's part of the problem is, like, there's just so many things in the military that you're supposed to be getting training on that actually we're not getting training. Ethical behavior, for example, is supposed to be, you're supposed to receive training in it every single year. And even though I was a trainer, I did not necessarily receive it every year. This is a common thing in the military that not enough people, not enough time, not enough money, not enough resources, too many missions. One of the things that I really think the military could do is get rid of some of the systemic discrimination that's in it. And for example, in the Queen's Regulations and Orders, which are the regulations for the Canadian Armed Forces, in Volume 1, it says he 167 times. She is not in the volume in any way. There is a single sentence where it talks about, wherever it says it's a masculine gender, is also included a female gender. But if I open the book and I read about command, and this is the book that tells the responsibilities of commanders from the vice chief of defense staff all the way down to the lowest officer, it talks about commander. It always says he. His responsibility. He will do this. He will do that. I know it's a PDF. I could change that and remove the gender nature of the book. I could probably do that myself in a couple hours. If I just replaced it with he, she, it would be even quicker. I could do that in minutes. I don't see why. Here we are, 7 years since the forces agreed to use gender-based analysis plus. Why they haven't changed those? It's in my last year, I managed to change it that when the base commander is leaving on my base, they no longer gave flowers to the wife, because that's what it said in the process and how that was working.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Sorry.
That was very helpful, and I really appreciate the flower example. I think that really clears up some of those myths that should be over by now. But I'm just wondering, because this is a study about what happens when people leave their service and go into the VAC, into the VAC system. So I'm just wondering if you could describe the discrimination and how it's translated into leaving the service and moving into VAC, and where the challenges are. I know that we've talked as well in the last study about data collection and having the appropriate information, and how if that data isn't gathered, then there's no measurement. I'm just wondering if you see any issues between those two now that you've gone through that process and are currently going through that process.
One of the things that I experience now, that I've experienced actually dealing with VAC some more, is kind of the same thing that Vivian talked about. VAC is focused, it's set up to treat people that have bullet wounds and limb amputations. And although they're now, well, not now, but for the last few years, they've been accepting mental trauma, they still do not see how that impact, how the mental trauma that you can have a lifelong impact on a person's health. I think that's the biggest problem. VAC has a bias against accepting a physical injury as caused by mental trauma.
Thank you for that. And I think that's an important point, is that, and you've talked about this, how the mental impacts the physical health. So do you feel like, because we've heard again and again that when you're in the CAF, if it's not recorded properly, when you get to VAC, it's hard to claim the injury. Is that part of the challenge, that transfer of information? Is it not clear enough from CAF to VAC?
In the past, for sure, I would say, but right now, when I was still in the forces, it was, as I said in my opening statement, it was documented by a military, by a Canadian Forces Health Services psychologist, that I had suffered serious physical impact of the mental trauma that I dealt with. The VAC does not want to accept that it's linked, that there's a linkage. That physical trauma is, and I see that more as an issue from backside. My sense as I was leaving the military is more accepting of mental trauma. My diabetes was a factor in my medical release, that's for sure. But at the time, it was in no way the fact that I was diabetic was I being penalized by the forces, other than the fact I was being released. And I don't dispute that was something, because I could no longer meet universality of service. And I do believe in that principle that every person in the military has to be able to serve as required by the Canadian government. So I do accept that. It did lead to my medical release, at least partially. There was other physical problems related to my career that are unrelated to mental trauma. But I do, that was part of my reason for being released. I think it's really on VAC's part to be more aware of the linkage. When I put my claim into VAC, they just basically denied it. They said there's no linkage.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Usherwood. So that's the end of the first round of questions. So now we're going to start a new one. And I'd like to invite MP Terry Dodell for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both of our guests today. for their testimony and certainly as pioneers to hopefully have some changes happen since the time that they've served. So thank you for your service. My question now is going to go to Ms. Stewart, and I know at the time you said there was no exit interview. I hope that's not common now, because I think it's quite important to do that so we can see what we can improve on. And congratulations on your retirement. You just said you were retired, and it's fantastic that you went from one career to another successful career. So certainly lots of hard work there. I guess one of the questions I have for you is a couple words popped up in your testimony that sort of caught my eye, and you talked about the gatekeepers, and I'm just wondering if you could perhaps elaborate a little bit more about that comment.
Yes, thank you. Based on my understanding of how VAC works, which, as I've said before, I don't have any direct personal contact with VAC. However, it does seem to me that based on what our council has heard from the women veterans who were involved in Merlo Davidson, and also had occasion to seek assistance from VAC and use services and obtain benefits, that the frontline workers are often create more of a barrier than the assistants. They're supposed to be there to open the door to these people, to say, yes, we have programs and services to help you, instead of looking at an application, denying it right off the bat because it doesn't, and now I'm supposing something here, it doesn't meet everything on somebody's checklist. So it does seem to me, and perhaps Nina can speak to this as well, is that front line of VAC, especially for people who have suffered some trauma, especially in light of PTSD, which seems to be more common now than it ever has been, is that they're not, they are there to screen out rather than to assist, to provide those resources to veterans that the Pension Act says VAC was created to provide.
Thank you. I didn't know if, Ms. Underwood, if you wanted to make a couple comments on that as well.
Yeah, I know someone, an RCMP after 33 years, who just released as officially as of yesterday. And in comparing their release compared to mine, because I was being medically released, I had a nurse from the local military hospital take me step by step how to apply and everything to VAC. Once I got to VAC, it's like, okay, well, this wasn't mentioned because, you know, neither one of us thought of it, or for whatever reason. And then I'm having to go through the same hoops. It would actually, an intake interview would be extremely useful. But my understanding for RCMP leaving, like I said, I have a friend who's just released officially as yesterday, according to her Facebook page. Yeah, there's nothing. There's the difference between the release program in the military, for example, with the Departure for Dignity and other events, is night and day different from what I hear from the RCMP, from members of the RCMP.
So do you think, as perhaps a recommendation on this study that we're doing, that do you think that might be helpful for Veterans Affairs Canada, perhaps, hire more women veterans and those from other communities, and maybe that would help maybe understand some of the issues that the calls are coming in?
Well, I don't have any idea of their employment numbers. I'm not sure that. Hiring more veterans would definitely help. You can't, as I said earlier, you can't understand how someone's life is if you don't know their life, if you haven't experienced it. So I think that would certainly be useful. But my recommendation would be to have an intake interview which I never had.
Okay. And the same question would go to Ms. Stewart.
Yes, I think probably having, I guess, the people who are, and as Nina says, either doing an intake interview or the first line that the claimants meet have some awareness of the experiences and lives of women veterans, both in the RCMP and CAF, obviously. So perhaps a subject matter expert or additional training, just something to, I guess, up the level of, I don't want to say professionalism, but I will say that, up the level of professionalism at that first stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now let's go for 5 minutes. Let's invite Honorable Caroline Bennett, please.
Well, thank you both very much. And I think throughout the study, we've been hearing a lot about people feeling invisible or being judged instead of being believed. And I think throughout, I think the movements around mental health and around people feeling looked after, sort of physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever, that the being connected with a peer and an appropriately chosen peer can make it very much easier, because I think a lot of what we're hearing is people don't even know what they were entitled to. And so in that bridging, would both of you comment on, it sounds like we were hearing on Tuesday that there ought to be an exit interview, but I think what I'm hearing from you, there also should be an intake interview in terms of how there could be that bridge between what somebody experienced and why sometimes they were leaving, but also then a warm handoff to the intake person who could make sure that everybody gets everything they need. And I think, as Ms. Stewart said, that it's not just whether you get your lawn cut or what people's perception of what they're entitled to is there. So I guess I'd like to know whether you can see that there could be, in the recommendations, anything along those lines, and then in terms of awareness. And then I would also like to hear from Ms. Stewart. You did mention in your opening remarks that there are situations where you think VAC's legal interpretation has negatively affected women vets. So just if you would comment on those things.
Okay, I'll go first on this one then. Thanks. Thank you. So I think on the whole idea of exit interviews, that's something that our council raised back in 2014 in the report that we produced on a crisis in leadership in the RCMP. To my knowledge, and obviously given Nina's testimony just now, those don't exist yet. And it just seems to be such an important thing for the force, especially also given the changes it says it is making, according to the Chief Human Resources Officer, that are being implemented supposedly as a result of Mr. Justice Bastarach's report. So exit interviews, I think an intake interview or the handoff, as you suggest, would probably be good. And from my perspective, I think the exit interview should include, if there hasn't already been, the education and information on VAC, its services, benefits that are available, that information, I mean, that would be the time to provide that information to our retiring members or leaving members. So I'll just jump quickly to the second part of your question on the problems that we've looked at in VAC's legal interpretations. This primarily to do with the Merlo-Davidson class action. The first thing we looked at involved the case of Krista Carley, who was a member who applied, put in a claim in Merlo-Davidson, but before her claim was actually dealt with, she committed suicide, sadly. And then the assessor at the time took the position that because she was not alive at the time, she was not alive when her claim was coming up to be dealt with. They closed her file, and that was part of how the settlement dealt with that. Our council sent a letter to the Minister of Public Safety at the time, which was Bill Blair, saying, you know, this cannot be. She got her claim in. How is it that you are now denying her family the entitled to benefits that they received and receive it under other legislation that the country has? And at the end of the day, that decision was formally reversed by way of a court order in the federal court. When the Merlo-Davidson settlement was approved by the court retained jurisdiction over the settlement for its implementation, its interpretation, and its enforcement. So from my perspective, I guess that's also a possibility still here. As far as I know, it's still open to the court to deal with issues that arise out of the settlement agreement. The second point comes down to the reductions in disability pensions that have been made by VAC that we've called the clawbacks under Section 25 of the Pension Act. And that's one that we have also put our views forth and just said there was clearly an error made in the drafting of the settlement agreement, and the clause that deals with the ability of the government to reduce settlement awards is ambiguous. And I can go into that in great detail from a legal perspective, but I'll just say that this is an issue that has not yet been resolved, despite the representations of the deputy minister who was here before you last March as well.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Stewart. I saw Mrs. Usherwood, you're a little bit anxious to take part of the conversation. I can give you a minute if you want to, and to answer that, please.
In the military, there is an exit interview to do with your medical health if you are being medically released. I believe that they were going to do that as well for all releases, but I'm not aware of that. From the time I first put my application into the Veterans Affairs until someone actually finally did an interview with me of my current health, it was a year and a half. And that was not done by Veterans Affairs. It was actually done by the PCVRS, the new company that's been hired to do that. I can't remember what exactly it stands for. And to be honest, the communication with them since then have been relatively non-existent. An interview on being on an application to the Veterans Affairs should happen. Not that, because, as Vivian said, we don't know what we're entitled to. And I still, to this day, do not know what is a long-term disability as far as VAC, and what is a disability.
Thank you very much. So, maintenant, nous allons retourner.
Now we'll go back to Mr. Desilets for 2.5 minutes. You have the floor, Mr. Desilets. We'll go in the same vein with you, Ms. Stewart, concerning the applications for compensation that were done. Could you tell me what impact could this settlement have exactly?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I will try to answer in French, if you may allow me. It's Article 8.02. I have a copy of the settlement here with me. We can say that it includes two sentences. The first sentence says that the funds that veterans will receive will not be reduced by the minister or by the government. The second sentence of the settlement states that please don't feel obliged to speak in French. It's much appreciated, though, but you can do whatever you feel. The second sentence.
That article basically says that nothing in the settlement agreement will prevent the minister from making the reductions they're allowed to make under that act. So from my perspective, what we are looking at is a very important clause, article in the settlement agreement that is inconsistent. At first it says, no, we won't. Then it says, yes, we might. And so going back to, we have raised that. The council has raised that issue. But basically, in connection with Section 25 and the reductions that have been made to some of the veterans who put in for disability pensions for PTSD, but the reaction that we have is that, this is the interpretation. This is the interpretation of Section 25 that has been given, and so there's nothing in the settlement agreement that says we can't do this. That may be, but if that is the case, then our council would hope that one of the things this committee will do is push for an amendment to the Pension Act to specifically exclude, and I'll just give you some exact wording on that, to basically, and to clarify that settlement awards for any kind of harm or injury resulting from inappropriate sexualized conduct of any kind, sexual assault, intimidation, bullying, and aggression are specifically excluded from the clawback provisions of the Pension Act. Now, if that seems too broad, then we could make it specific to Merlo-Davidson. Another option, if I may just quickly jump in with this, another option, which has just arisen to my knowledge in the last day or so, is related to the Krista Carley affair, which I did mention earlier in my testimony. That was that change to the understanding and approach of the assessor to the date when claims were filed and when claims could be assessed as affecting a veteran's entitlement, that was changed by consent of all the parties by court order. So the agreement itself was amended to clarify what the date would be, what the cutoff date would be. And it went out to, if somebody was alive before the opt-out date, their claim would be assessed, and their family, their successors would receive that money.
Thank you, Mrs. Stewart, and I invite you, if you have more information like that settlement, you can send that to the clerk, please, and we'll take that in consideration. So now I'd like to invite Miss Rachel Blaney, 2 minutes and a half.
Well, thank you so much. And Ms. Stewart, I want to come back to you and thank you so much for giving us that information. I know that the Merlo-Davidson class action was brought forward by so many brave women who were trying to obtain justice. And tragically, what we saw, of course, was VAC's clawbacks not only defeated the purpose of that action and the objections of the settlements, it re-victimized women again. So I guess my question to you, and you've talked about it a little bit already, is one, not only, in my opinion, did it re-victimize, I think it also silenced other women who may have come forward. And the whole point of these actions, I think, are to stop the behavior. So I just want to know your thoughts on, did this also block women from coming forward? And the second one, you talked about the committee having a strong recommendation moving forward on this. Do you think that a recommendation saying that the legislation should be changed to acknowledge, and I actually don't think your definition is too broad. I think any time a person is in the workplace and they are violently attacked as a cause of that workplace, especially in this context, we need to honor that. So if you could answer those two questions. Did it block other women from coming forward? Are we now missing a bunch of women who could have come forward? And two, is the legislation the smartest way for us to go forward as a committee in our recommendation?
Thank you for the question. So on the first one, did it block women? Yes, it did. It did. The information that we have, and people talk. So somebody may have a bad experience, and other women, other members are going to hear about that and hear about it fairly quickly. So it's our information that 1/3 of claimants were not accepted under Merlo-Davidson. And even those ones whose claims were accepted did not get assessed at the level they expected. Presumably, they went in expecting to have their claims accepted at a higher level. They didn't get that. And then there were other women that we know of who were affected who could not even face putting a claim in. So I guess in our council's view, whatever numbers the RCMP or VAC have for claimants in the class action, they likely fall far short of those who were actually affected or suffered some kind of abuse during their service. And we also have anecdotal evidence of people who did go through the lengthy process of putting in a claim. They were shattered all over again, and in some cases suffered new PTSD that they hadn't even had before. So as you said, there was re-traumatizing all around, and it was a situation where the class action should not even have been necessary. The RCMP had known about these problems for years and years and years, but they did nothing. And certainly the women who were brave enough to come forward with those, it was, I'm sure, their expectation, as it was our expectation, that it would change things, that there would be behavior correction. Money was not going to make them whole again. So just briefly. Oh,
yeah. Yes, okay, thank you. So maybe you're going to have a chance to come back. And I'd like to invite MP Blake Richards for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I've got some questions for each of you. And a lot of it is ground that you've covered a little bit in either your opening statements or maybe in responses to other questions, but maybe that I think there's more room for you to go down the road on these things. So I'll start with you, Ms. Stewart. You've probably heard, it's quite a common saying amongst veterans, the triple D policy: deny, delay, die. And you've touched on a little bit of this in your opening statement, I would say, because you talked about VAC processes not being clear enough and there being too many gatekeepers. And I know you had a chance to respond to a question about this a little bit earlier. So that in my mind kind of speaks a little bit to the delay part of it. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand a little further on the deny part of it, because you also in your opening statement referred to Veterans Affairs Canada as, and I'll quote you, Canada's meanest insurance agency. I've never heard it put quite that way before, but I've certainly heard the sentiment from many veterans over the years. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate on that when you talk about VAC as being Canada's meanest insurance agency. Explain for us a little bit what you're referring to there.
Yeah, I mean, and I cannot take credit for that. That was Christine Wood, who spoke to you on April 17th. Those were her words. And I have to say that I've gone back and listened to and watched a lot of the sessions that have taken place for this women's study. And clearly it is basically the sense that I have, the impressions that's left with me, and I'm sure with the rest of the RCMP Veteran Women's Council, is that it does behave more like an insurance company than like the resource that it was intended to be, and that is, and that intention, I think, is reflected in the Pension Act, in the preamble, and right at the beginning. What is the purpose and object of the Pension Act? And if your people are only treating the claimants, who are the veterans, as it seems like as bumps along the way, and protecting the government's money to the detriment of a veteran, then that's pretty bad insurance behavior. And as a former lawyer practicing complex civil litigation, some of it which involved insurance claims, I would have been shocked if an insurer had come across to one of my clients and acted in that way. It's just an insurance insurer in the private industry would, if this went to court, would be faced with a claim of acting in bad faith.
Yeah, and when you hear it put that way, it's pretty shocking, isn't it? Can you maybe, I'll give you an opportunity to elaborate on what it should look like. I mean, I've often heard, that the idea that that VAC does operate a bit more like an insurance company trying to find a way to deny claims, and I think that there's the obvious counter to that would be that the expectation would be to see it act more like a service provider that's there to be a provider of service that veterans are entitled to and that they deserve. Could you perhaps elaborate a little bit on what you think it should look like? What should the process look like for a veteran, rather than being kind of up against a tough, mean insurance agency?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a very big question, and certainly, I guess it really comes down to, and again, yes, they're a service provider. They're not paying out insurance claims, and the intake, the having people who can assist, and certainly for RCMP and other veterans, I have to give a shout out to the Royal Canadian Legion, who have service officers all across Canada and who do help veterans free of charge to put their claims together to make sure they've got everything they need and to help them actually get a good, be able to get through the process. But I mean, when you look at it, it's like, why, for something that's a service provider for people who are veterans, why should they need somebody to help them go through? The process should be streamlined. It should be simple. It should be easy for people to understand who aren't lawyers and who haven't been through it before.
Yeah, I think that was kind of where my next question was going. Was, I've often said that to some of the folks that do this work at the Legion. I've said that to them, that thank you for being there for our veterans, but it's too bad that you even need to be there, to do this work, because it shouldn't be necessary for a veteran to need help to navigate that process. The process should be simple enough that a veteran can get through it quickly and easily. Would you agree? Is that the ultimate goal that we should be seeking when we talk about the services Veterans Affairs provides, to provide a service in a timely and efficient manner to veterans, that they so that they don't have to engage others to try and navigate through the process?
The short answer to that is yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. But I'd like to ask members, I think that Mrs. Osherwood would like to react to that for a few seconds. No?
Yes, actually. One of the things, the whole deny, and die, that's definitely a sense that everybody in the military experience has. I know personally in my own case and another case that I was involved in helping, eventually did get approved. They did agree, and when it went before the review board, before the Pension Advocate Review Board, it was approved. And meanwhile, the VAC was just outright denying for the same reason. It's they understand a shotgun wound or a knife cut or stuff like that, but they don't work well with mental injuries.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to MP Sean Casey for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stewart, I want to come back to the exchange that you had with Mr. Desley and Ms. Blaney with respect to the Pension Act and the clawbacks. So as you were talking, I pulled up the Pension Act, and I think you're talking about Section 25A. I would be, and I think reading the room, I think there's an appetite here for making a recommendation to amend the legislation. If you could send along the wording that you're talking that you had mentioned, that would be helpful. Or if there's a brief where it resides, it would be nice to have that. My sense in what I heard from you is that the amendment would look something like including the words that you had with respect to harm or injury. And then you said if that's too broad, then perhaps just exclude out the claimants under the class action litigation. I think my suggestion would be to do both, is to use the broad wording and then say including but not limited to participants in the Merlo-Davidson litigation, and if there are other class action litigants that you think should be caught, I guess I'd be interested to know that, and I think the committee would, either in response to this question or by way of a follow-up brief. That would be quite helpful to us. Feel free to react to that. Yep.
Yes, I have submitted a supplementary brief that does include the wording that I did read out to you earlier, and I can certainly add to that to anything else, because it's my understanding there seem to be other class actions out there as well. So,
okay, thank you. I want to come to your experience with the RCMP Veteran Women's Council. Your colleague Jane Hall testified earlier, or appeared before committee earlier this week. And one of the things she talked about, and you touched upon, is that there's work to do in terms of increasing the level of awareness among RCMP vets of what is available through Veterans Affairs. I just want to give you a minute to maybe lay out for us what your suggestions would be to increase that awareness.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think what our council has been considering, and what we've discussed, is to basically put the onus on the RCMP here. Now, as I understand it, the RCMP contracts out the administration of these kinds of services to VAC. VAC bills the RCMP for that administration of services annually. So it seems to me that this may be one of the things that has been kind of falling between those two entities. One thinking, oh, well, you'll handle this because it's your members, and the other one thinking, well, you'll handle this because it's your programs and services. So I think for us, what we would like to see and would like to recommend is that the RCMP institute a program of just educating members and informing them right from day one. I mean, at DEPO in Regina, you take courses on all kinds of things, and there are information sessions on all kinds of things. So this is the kind of thing that could start at day one and then be repeated at different stages of a member's career, and certainly to have something at the end so that the transition can be an informed transition out into civilian life. And if there are benefits and programs and services available, you find out what they are without having to wait 20, 25 years to find out.
I know you indicated that you're not a VAC client, but I expect through your work with the Women's Council, you've heard lots about it. Any advice for Veterans Affairs with respect to the training or experience of case managers who deal with RCMP vets?
I think the biggest thing that I've heard is to have better awareness of trauma, of PTSD. So that probably, requires, as I said earlier, trauma training. So I gathered there are services out there that provide that, but certainly to have that kind of education and training for those workers is important.
Thank you very much. So now this is the last round of questions, and I would like to invite, she's on the web, Mrs. Kathy Wogenthal, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. I hope that I can be heard. Good?
Good.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much for coming and us being able to have a significant amount of time with you today. I just want to bring to the awareness, and I did miss the first part of the meeting, so if I'm repeating something, just let me know. The RCMP chose not to move over to the new Veterans Charter, so you are part of the old Pension Act. And I know that there is some differences in services because of that. I know that the Merlot report, the RCMP indicated that they were responding to the 4 specific areas already, and that it was a priority: harassment and prevention and resolution, addressing systemic barriers, recruitment and onboarding, talking specifically there about the concerns I've heard a bit from you today. And then as well, I'm curious about the side of cadet training and leadership development, and all of this so much of what we're dealing with here is due to poor behaviors, quite honestly, within the time that you were serving, that BAC now has a responsibility for dealing with. And I would just like to hear your perspectives, maybe first of all from the CAF perspective, how important you think it is that if we're going to bring about a true culture change, that has to start with the youngest generation and a very intentional effort to instill those values in treatment of one another. So just a comment or two in that regard.
Well, I think that's aimed at me.
Sure.
As part of the problem, I mean, to be honest, is Canadian society itself, and that's where where recruits are drawn from. So part of it is we need to change in Canadian society. There is intention, but again, part of the problem that I see in my career is that even when there's intention, there isn't time and energy put to the intention of changing the culture. That would be my first thought.
Can I ask you then?
Excuse me, Mrs. Wagenthal. The interpreters has a little bit problem with the sound because there was no sound check when you came. But could you raise a little bit the microphone and say a few words? So we'll try to. Is that okay?
Sure. Okay. So is this better if I raise it a little bit, or?
Yes, it's very good. Okay, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much. And now I have to remember my train of thought. In discussing that change that needs to take place across society, a lot of what I'm hearing today, you're referring to things that have been discussed over and over again, even in the 8 years that I've been part of this committee, where we do the report that is really important. The recommendations are created. They go to the government, they give a response, but from the committee perspective, there has never been follow-up on where we are at as CAF, as the RCMP, with those recommendations that were made. Do you think that that's something that is missing in this whole process, where you feel like you've been here before as a witness and feel sometimes that you're on a wheel of going round and round?
Short answer, yes. I mean, CAF hasn't even acted on all of Madame Deschamps' recommendations. Never mind what the committee does.
Right. So would it be good for our committees to be taking some responsibility in that? In the meeting yesterday with Ms. Hall, it was mentioned that we have a duty to make sure as a committee that these things are followed through on. That's pretty tough for a committee to do when you're dealing with a government that then is responsible for those recommendations. So would you find it helpful if you mentioned a few recommendations that you feel have not been followed through on, that you could encourage this committee to possibly follow up on, to get feedback, to see where things are at, and whether we can make a difference in encouraging next steps?
Well, the more voices pointing out the fact that the government's not doing what it's been recommended to do, the better it helps. But I mean, we can look at lots of reports, and frankly, a lot of them don't happen.
Yes, I hear you. But that unfortunately is where our role is to attempt to draw more light on those circumstances. So, okay, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Our other witness, would you have anything you'd like to add to my comments?
I think just quickly, and thank you for the question, is yes, I mean, there have been, for the RCMP and culture change, which they are attempting to implement now. Since 2007, we've had 7 or 8 reports and studies done. There have been over 100 recommendations made, and very few of them followed up on. So, I can see culture change being encouraged at the lower levels, at the people who are coming in, but it's really up to the leadership to really make that happen, because certainly with the RCMP, sometimes it's a top-down thing that force stuff to actually change and actually happen.
Right. Thank you. I really appreciate that because I think that is what we have heard overall as well. A lot of the issues are an issue at the top level, and then at the same time, if you want to see that take place, that upper level is really where it needs to be enacted. So, do you have any recommendations on how we could go about seeing those changes take place in CAF and in the RCMP? Really, there is a lot of crossover here.
Quickly, please, for a few seconds.
That's something, and thank you for the question. That's probably something we can include in a supplementary brief to the committee, because I think it's probably going to take a little bit longer than Monsieur le Président is willing to give me.
All right, thank you so much.
Merci, Madame Stewart. Voyez que...
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I'm trying to respect the time, so please feel free to send any additional information to our clerk. We are not done yet. I would like to call on Mr. Brian May, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In my sorry, Mike, I'm at the wrong spot. Thank you. And first and foremost, thank you both for your service, not just while you were with the RCMP and the Canadian Armed Forces, but your continued service up until including today to help us with this study. I have questions for both of you, but I'll start with Sergeant Usherwood. My first question, I guess, thought is, during my time on the defense file, I had the privilege to visit a number of our bases, and I got to meet with very dedicated people within the DAGs, the diversity advisory groups. Were those institutions available to you when you were serving?
I believe the first DAG was formed about 20 years after I joined the forces. So as a result of Employment Equity Act in 1995, I don't know when they were actually started in the forces, but I believe the Defense Aboriginal Advisory Group is probably now 22, 23 years old.
Do you work with them at all, or have you had any involvement with them in trying to improve upon them to provide a better environment for people?
The purpose of the DAG is to act both as an advisory to the leadership and to also, and yes, I did, and also to point out issues that the DAG members might see. I don't feel that the leadership actually uses the DAG as much as they should. Mainly, frankly, in my experience, the DAGs are used to acknowledge the International Day Against Racism, the International Day of Women, et cetera, more to highlight events than actually to do any change in the system. I know in some bases that they're more active and get more involvement, but mostly from what I've seen, it's initiated by the DAGs, and the DAGs are an advisory group. They are not an action group.
It's a very solid point. And I guess my question to you then would be, what, if any, recommendations would you give to us to maybe improve upon them? And specifically, and the reason I bring it up here in Veterans Affairs, a number of folks that I spoke with hoped that the DAGs could evolve to support people in transition into civilian life in a better way. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to that and maybe provide some recommendations to this committee in that regard.
Well, the simplest answer is the Employment Equity Act has not been amended since 1995, as far as the last time I looked at it. So maybe there needs to be an amendment to that. Frankly, it's almost like the government said, okay, we'll have employment equity. Okay, we passed the act. We checked our box. We're done.
Excellent. Thank you. In your opinion, how does VAC, or how would VAC do a better job collecting data about gender specifically, and would it help better serve women and veterans from the 2S LGBT QIA plus communities?
I'm not an expert on privacy, so I don't feel that I could actually suggest any suggestions, because privacy comes into it, and the whole Privacy Act is not even an act I've read, so I can't speak on that.
Fair enough. Ms. Stewart, as you probably know, Veterans Affairs continues to integrate the work of Gender-Based Analysis Plus into the work of the department and promote inclusion for all veterans. How can we strengthen the treatment, transition supports, recognition, and care of women veterans from all backgrounds?
Thank you for the question. It's a far-reaching one, I have to say. I think we've touched on a few of the points here today. Basically, transitioning into a more welcoming environment if you're actually looking at what VAC is offering. Again, programs, services, better training, better awareness of women veterans' experiences, their particular issues relating to their service, the kinds of things that are different for them than for their male colleagues. I'm not sure I've answered your question. If you have a follow-up, I'm happy to deal with it.
I wish I had the time to do that, but I'm getting the look from the chair. So
thank you so much. We have two last interventions, but two quick one of 2.5 and 2 minutes, about 2 minutes. And l'avant-dernière question, alors.
The last but one question is from Mr. Luc Desilets. Go ahead, Mr. Desilets. Ms. Stewart, during one of your previous interventions a short while ago, you said many recommendations had come out of that committee and could have been implemented. To reassure you, I think we are all on the same page, but we need to stay hopeful. And Mr. Casey made a request, and I think you are going to do that. We would like to receive your recommendations in writing, which we can add to our report concerning the class action suit. But if there's anything that comes to mind as recommendation, it will be well received. Let me ask you maybe a naive question. I'm not as experienced as you on the matter. This class action suit, does it have retroactive power? Someone who had experienced such experiences 5 years ago, could they take advantage of this?
Bon, vous pourriez répéter un petit peu.
Could you please repeat?
Avez-vous entendu la question?
Did you hear the question? Could you please repeat? No problem. This is my question. Considering the results of the class action suit now, could it be used as some sort of jurisprudence so that veterans who have gone through aggressions or similar problems, suicide and so on, and families want to take advantage of this, could this be done retroactively?
My understanding is no. The class has been closed, and so for anybody to bring something new forward, they would probably have to either start their own lawsuit or start a new class action.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Desiree.
Round of questions. So, Miss Rachel Blaney, you have 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And if I could return to Ms. Usherwood, there was some discussion earlier on about case managers and some of the work that they need to do or training they may require. I'm just wondering, in terms of service delivery, in specific, I'm going to be specific to the trans community at VAC, what kind of skills do you think would open up their process to be a little bit more inclusive? You spoke a lot about needing supports or needing VAC staff needing to understand mental health concerns, but I'm just wondering if you could talk specifically about what would be helpful for somebody to come forward and actually feel heard and to see action happen on their file. What kind of training would be supportive for those caseworkers on the other side?
I'm not exactly sure what kind of training I could recommend. One of the biggest problems is communication. I just find that communication is very, very slow, and frequently for me, and I'm pretty sure I've heard this for other people, it's waiting to hear from back and acknowledging that they've even received your message in the first place it's slower than it was before. That's for sure. I think it is definitely slower. I send a message and it doesn't even get forwarded to anybody for like 5 days.
Okay, that's very helpful. And Ms. Stewart, if I could just close very quickly with you, I'm just wondering, we know that the Merlo-Davidson class action resulted in money paid by the government to those who received such terrible harm. I'm just wondering, does this provide enough incentive for the RCMP to actually change?
One might have thought so. But sadly, I am not sure about that. I'm not convinced, but I'm keeping an open mind that they will do what they say they are going to do now.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to stop right here. So on behalf of all members of the committee, I'd like to thank our witnesses. And today we have, as individual, Mrs. Nina Charlene Usherwood, and also Mrs. Vivian Stewart from the RCMP Veteran Women's Council. So thank you very much for your participation, and do not hesitate to send us more information to the clerk. And next week, we're going to continue our study. But for now, I'd like to know if a member would like to adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. It's you.